Hi, and welcome to our second Twitch stream. I am NQ Naris, and we're coming to you live from our homes. So please we apologize for cameras, lighting, sound, all those issues, but that's what we get. I'm going to get right into it. So I'd like to take a moment to welcome our two guests today. You all know and love him. Let's talk to JC, our CEO and creative director, and NQ Entropy, game designer. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Nice.
So we want to get right into the action because we know everyone has busy schedules, and we've prepared a dev diary, which we're going to give you guys the exclusive first look at. So let's roll it, please.
Hey everyone, NQ Tilt here, coming back at you with another dev diary. As we look ahead to the beta release and NDA lift coming later this year, the team has been working on some awesome new additions to Dual Universe. Here's just a sample of what you can expect coming soon. First up is ore outlining, which helps ensure that no small bits of ore are left behind while mining. Originally, this was only a feature for surface harvesting, but we've expanded it in order to make mining more fun and efficient. Up next is the Nanoformer Market, which is a version of the market interface that players can access from anywhere in the game world by pressing the J key, without requiring them to be near a market pod. With this version of the market screen, you can still create and fulfill buy or sell orders as usual. However, you won't be able to retrieve your purchased goods through the Nanoformer Market. To do that, you'll still need to interact with the physical market pods scattered throughout the game world. There are some new exciting changes coming to the inventory and crafting menus as well. We know many of you were wondering why we removed the item inspector window from these menus, so we just added it back in. In the inventory menu, selecting items or ingredients will give you more info about them. There's also a filter system, which allows players to narrow down items or materials in their inventory based on predefined or customized filters. As for crafting, we've added an option for players to create the same item using different recipes. This change also applies to industry, with multiple recipes for crafting each item. This is a simple quality of life change and follows the same UI guidelines as the inventory and crafting menus. Now it's time to discuss a great new feature that all cargo pilots in Dual Universe will love: warp drives. This feature allows players to travel across the void with extreme speed compared to regular space engines.
Warp sequence initiated.
The warp drive is a costly element which can be attached to any ship, though it takes up quite a bit of room, and it can only work in space at a reasonable distance away from planets. Warping is only possible for two types of destinations: either celestial bodies such as planets, moons, or relays, or large space stations equipped with both a large space core and a warp beacon.
Warp sequence completed.
This means that you can travel to any of your or your organization's constructs that are equipped with a warp beacon in space. Taking damage during combat will activate a cooldown on your warp drive, so you can't just warp out of danger that easily. You will also need warp cells, which are stored in a container that are linked to your warp drive, and that will be consumed in proportion to the mass moved and distance traveled. Essentially, warp drives are a cool way to travel across the system, but they don't come cheap. It's up to you to do the math and see if it's worth warping versus using traditional drive propulsion.
Warp sequence completed.
We're also adding fog to Dual Universe. Our first iteration of this will be planet-wide and will be comprised of various parameters on the game development side, such as color tint, which takes into account the brightness, location, time of day, and dampening threshold, which determines how far you can see into the fog and the fog height. While this is just the first version of fog in the game, we plan on ultimately having fog zones depending on a planet's individual biomes. We feel that this brings a unique atmosphere to the game, and once fully implemented will breathe a lot of life into each individual planet. Finally, we're adding custom key mapping to Dual Universe. Located in Settings, players now have the option to completely customize their keyboard while playing, including modifiers that allow you to hold either Shift, Control, or Alt, and the ability to map axes to certain controls. Assigning one axis automatically assigns both directions for opposite controls, and even includes a visual cue that shows that they're linked. You can even assign controller buttons, giving players more options to control their constructs and avatars. We hope this has been an informative and entertaining look at some new changes coming to Dual Universe soon. We'll be showcasing more exciting features in another upcoming Dev Diary, so stay tuned.
And welcome back. So there you have it, our next Dev Diary. We're going to upload that a little bit later to YouTube in case you want to watch it again. But let's get to it. You saw some really cool stuff in that video, and we've got things we want to talk about. You guys raised a lot of questions when we did the podcast about Alpha 3.1. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about some of those topics. So JC, you want to take it away? Let's start with warp drives.
Sure. Yes, warp drives, and then we're going to talk about surrogates. Two of the features that got the community to talk a lot about. So today we want to clarify, what we're going to do with these features, where they come from, and try hopefully to reassure everybody that this is not something that's going to break the game in any way. So let's start with the warp drive. So just to remind you, the reason for the warp drives is that we want to make it really easy to have commerce between different planets, between distant places in the game. And the way it was before is that you had several hours to something like 6 hours between one planet to the other. That is kind of cool for certain type of players who really like the absolute immersion. We get that. But it's a clear no-go for most others. I mean, this is something we wanted to address by offering a way for you to navigate between planets easily. That's one thing. And the other thing that is important with warp drives is the possibility for an organization to have a way for all the members to be able to navigate quickly between headquarters, different stations, and so on, so that you can have a lively sort of community life within this organization. That's something, again, that would be difficult. That would actually, as a consequence, without the warp drives, you would have organization concentrated in some area, and it would be very difficult for a large organization to spread in the whole game universe. So this is why there are warp drives. They don't come cheap. You still have to use the warp cells to be able to travel. That costs a lot. Also, something that perhaps people don't necessarily see is that suppose you want to go from one planet's ground to another planet's ground. It's not going to be like instant, like teleportation, super quick thing. Even so, you might have the capability to pay for the warp cells, because you need first to go in orbit to reach a point where the warp cells will be activated, where you'll be able to activate it. Then you warp, and then you have to re-enter the atmosphere, or if no atmosphere, I mean, in any case, you have to get close to the ground and land. And this is not something you do instantly. So in any case, planet-to-planet ground transport is going to be something that takes a bit of time, but not 6 hours. That's the key thing. That being said, with the warp, we are aware that there are certain loopholes, certain things that could be abused in the game design as it is done today. In particular, we want to make sure that you cannot just pop a warp beacon and immediately have a huge fleet that comes at that point, out of nowhere. This is a very important point for PvP. So we have introduced a 24 hours limitation before you can actually use a warp beacon. Currently, it's set on the 24 hours countdown starts on the time the space core unit has been deployed. This is something we're going to change so that it's when the warp beacon is deployed, not the space core unit. So that's a little detail, but this is related to potential abuses, so this is going to be fixed. We're going to also make the warp beacons way more visible in the 3D world and on the radar. In particular, if you press V, to see the surrounding constructs, they will be marked as very clearly visible. This construct has a warp beacon. So it's not like the guy who installs this space station a bit away from your base, what's going on. Oh, there's a warp beacon that just popped. I mean, you're aware of that. So if you want to take a measure to counter that and start to destroy it, basically, you will have ample time to realize what's going on and be able to respond. So that's another thing. The third thing we're considering, so we're going to see how we can do that, is to say that there's except for the walk to the planets, there would be a sort of a limitation in the amount of mass per unit of time, so like tons per hours, that can actually walk through a given warp beacon. That means that you can warp some ships, but it can't sort of pop out of existence a giant fleet out of nowhere. So this is something we're going to consider as well, so that the normal travel between stations and so on, that is part of the daily use of the daily activities of an organization, is going to be okay. But if you try to summon a giant fleet, there will be limitations to that. And we might actually use talents and some other ways to gamify these limits, so that you could increase it a little bit and things like that. But this is something we're still discussing. So this is part of the things we have in mind for tweaking a little bit the mechanics of the warp, especially the warp beacons. And Kianchopi, you want to add something maybe on that?
I think in addition to that last point, I think this is quite important. We sort of released warp drives in quite a raw form. We knew that we needed them and we wanted them, but we consider it sort of an early version. I think what we're looking at now is, okay, what set of restrictions and what changes are needed to have them make sense, to have them be balanced, to make sure that we don't have any exploits in the game. So the change on the UI where you'll be able to see the warp beacons around you. That's more of a change, for example, where we want warp beacons to feel fair, right? So we don't want there to be potentially hundreds of contracts. It's like, oh, which one is the warp beacon on? Like, I have no idea. It's a mess. We want that interaction to feel fair. So if you can defend yourself, you can destroy that beacon before it onlines. You're talking, for example, about the limitation for the tons per hour or whatever other sort of limitation that we're looking at. We want that to make sense within the universe. So JC mentioned, we don't want fleets to just run around the universe, hundreds of contracts potentially just popping in and out of existence all across the world, just potentially destroying everything. We want to have those limitations in place and have them make sense so that everybody feels good about the system and that they make sense. And I think that's going to be the goal with warp drives from now until the future, whenever, pretty much to infinity, is to have them make sense and have them feel fair for everybody involved while fulfilling that initial need that we needed for warp drives, which is that, for the transport, for resources, and for trading and all that stuff.
Yep. So that covers it for what we have in mind for warp drives. Now let's talk about surrogate robots. I just want to stress again, the origin, the core reason why we came up with this feature, especially that late in the development stage. The core reason is very simple. It's for, when we have a streamer that is going to stream the game, or journalists who want to try the game, we want to make sure that within the 30 minutes time frame that he's going to devote maybe to experiencing the game, assuming it starts, at the beginning of the game, there is a way for him to experience some of the awesome content that has been made and be exposed to some of the really cool things that are in the game. And as you know, your universe is not like a game, you get it in 5 minutes, you're in the full game kind of game style of game design. It's more something that is progressive. We all like that, in fact, that is like something you build. So without a way to shortcut that somehow, then you would have the streamer that would be probably stuck to very basic stuff in the game, probably not even go to space, not even realize that there is a giant world out there, if we don't give a way to shortcut that. So of course, you could go online and watch a YouTube video from another guy. I mean, sure, but we want to make this whole thing stand alone so that you get into the game and you get to experience that. That being said, we don't want the surrogates to break anything else in the game. So maybe this first iteration has been going a bit too far into, oh, well, that's cool, we could also add this and this and that. So one thing we want to announce today is that we're going to seriously restrict the surrogates so that they cover that mission of exposing the game to streamers, journalists, and also, to beginners, players getting into the game, so to be able to show them what is there, why it's a great game, and get them excited, right? So this is going to be covered, but all the rest, we're going to be very careful on, providing those extra capabilities for surrogates one at a time after we have much discussion. So to clarify, right now the surrogates are more going to act like a sort of a remote camera where you can move around and see things at a distance and then come back where you were. Just to clarify, the resurrection nodes will not be activable, PvP will not be possible, crafting will not be possible, mining or surface harvesting will not be possible, and piloting will not be possible. So these are major, nerfs, if you want, on the way the surrogates work. It's just a remote camera, and it serves the purpose why it has been introduced, to be able to make the game easily, accessible, in its full capacity to people who have literally just a few minutes to discover it. And won't go on YouTube, because they are streamers. They're supposed to do that themselves, So this is something we think is addressed with the surrogates. We are also going to create some surrogate stations with some museums, for example, where we would expose all the great constructs that won, the different contests we've made before. So that we're going to organize that. So they're going to be there already. But of course, I think it's always good when we say to the community, well, this is not a feature that is restricted to Nova Quark. If you want to expose some of your stuff now, you can also put a pod and invite people to visit it. So it's going to be open, but to be clear, we're going to make sure that there are already some content, as the beta goes live, to witness, and we're going to build this content probably mostly based on the winners of the previous contests. So that's the spirit of the surrogates. Just to be clear, in doubt, if it's not authorized, it's not allowed. That's the principle we're going to follow with the surrogates, and we keep them in their core mission. And Entropy, you want to add something on that?
Absolutely. I think from a game design perspective here, I want to say like a couple of truths essentially about surrogates, right? And you guys can hold me accountable to these down the road. The first thing is that we really don't want surrogates to replace players. Okay, it's not the goal. That's never been the goal. We didn't put in surrogates with the intention of having surrogates just flatly replace players for any activity. That's not the goal. So surrogates should be something that is occasionally useful, that you interact with in specific cases, maybe in emergencies, maybe in when something aligns and you need to be using a surrogate. That's when we want them to be used. Then any situation or any activity where surrogates are taking over, we are prepared to change or nerf or do whatever we need to do to make sure that surrogates aren't a necessity for that activity. They don't become the base. And to make sure that players are always useful and that players are always preferred over surrogates. So those are sort of like the overarching rules. And if those rules are broken, and if something doesn't make sense, and if whatever it happens to be, regardless of what we restrict and de-restrict potentially in the future, those rules are going to stay in place as sort of like a guiding philosophy. And whenever there's a problem, we can say, okay, well, whatever this activity is, it could be mining, industry, crafting, whatever it happens to be, we can say, okay, well, this is a problem. Let's make the changes that we need to make sure that surrogates aren't overbearing and they remain an option, but that players are always going to be better, and you always want to use a player to be doing these things, as opposed to just defaulting to a surrogate.
And in the case the talent system is going to play also a central role. If we decide to unlock, let's say, surrogates for mining, it's clear that the fact that surrogates do not have any talent is going to make them very inefficient in any mining operation. So even if we were to open that possibility, which we want now, just to be clear again, but that would probably not be used by most players because of this penalty on the talents. Another thing also, by the way, I mentioned last time about the potential use of surrogates is the possibility to crew a battleship. I still believe that the current battleship, gameplay we have in mind is not going to really work without something like that. Without being able to summon some people of your organization inside the battleship. Maybe I'm wrong. So we're going to see, in the coming month, maybe, we're going to hear from the community that, hey, guys, the battleship thing is cool, but in practice, it's not operatable. We can't really use that because, battleships are almost never crewed, so that's a problem. So we're going to talk again at that time if that comes to be a real issue. I believe we need to do something about that. All games that have tried to do something like that have met that problem. So we have to think about it at some point. Perhaps the surrogate are the answer, perhaps not, perhaps something else. We'll see. But I just wanted to explain this was another reason why surrogates have been greenlit, and we decided to implement them in that particular case, for the battleship as a bug fix, sort of. Bugs are not always, in the code. There are also some design bugs that the game doesn't work, even though it doesn't crash or anything. But this was part of the things we considered a design bug. But we'll see, and we will consider and see what we have to do at that time.
I think just as a
Yeah.
quick final note on that, I think based on the feedback from the community and sort of what you guys have said, the approach right now is sort of to play it safe and to put these restrictions into place to make sure that we don't break anything, and in the future essentially just reevaluate and see what problems we can fix. Are these things really problems? Let's figure out, and as JC said, let's talk about it in time and see what we can do.
Cool. Okay. And there was a third topic we wanted to talk about, which is it may seem a bit more like detail for certain players who want to play with that, but I think it's important. It's the radar that we have now in PvP doesn't give you access to the ships you see through the Lua interface. It makes it difficult for people to create displays on their screens to monitor ships and so on and so on. This has been removed as a security measure to start with, to prevent automating, for example, the alignment of your ships toward the target, which is a very important part, of the PvP mechanics. You need to align your ship because there's an angle, for the weapon. So making this automatic, it means if you don't have that script, you're penalized most likely compared to people who have this. So we didn't want that to happen. And the thing is that we've been thinking more about how we could actually keep all the good uses of the radar with Lua, which comes, for example, as I said, visualization, but also auto guidance for docking and all sorts of things that are really useful and not a problem at all. And we realized that in all those useful cases, it happens with a ship that somehow or there's an agreement with that ship that it's okay to track me now, basically. So we want to make this thing explicit, and we're going to introduce a game feature that is that you can put what we call it a transponder on your ship and a transponder on another ship, and each of those transponders, they will come with a list of tags, like secret password if you want, and if one ship is using a radar, this radar will be able to get through the Lua API all the ships that have a non-empty intersection between the list of tags this ship has and the list of tags the distant ship has. So to be clear, if you have a space station that needs to monitor incoming ships for guidance, this space station will probably broadcast or make it public that there is a particular transponder tag that you need to have, which is whatever, like Starship. Okay, and any ship that wants to benefit from the automatic guidance, we need to put Starship into its transponder, and that makes it visible immediately to the station that can use it as part of its Lua scripts and so on. However, if you are attacking somebody, of course, you're not going to put in the transponder a tag that corresponds to this organization official tags or things like that, because you will be immediately visible to them through the Lua interface and possibly targeted. The alignment will work and things like that. So you will not obviously put that tag, and so it's going to be okay. So we have a way to make it basically explicit, the fact that you agree to be seen by somebody else. And that can be managed at the level of an organization. An organization has a bunch of tags that they use and they make it known. So, and they are fairly secret. That's interesting because it comes with potential spying gameplay, emergent gameplay. We all have in mind, this scene in Star Wars where the rebels somehow they manage to smuggle, to get access to the transponder tag of the Empire Station, and then they are allowed to get in. This kind of thing would be possible with this mechanism. So we're quite happy with that because it solves the problem of the Lua radar. We believe it does, and it opens also interesting emergent gameplays with trying to spy on those transponder tags and so on. So that's the answer we have for that. So it's currently in development, and it should be in the game as soon as possible. And if you have any question on that, of course, there is a live Q&A going on right after that. I think it's starting sort of now, and so don't hesitate. We can discuss that together.
Well, just as a quick addition to that, you covered it very well. But one thing that always was coming to mind, at least for me, when we were talking about this, I don't know if we have any Rust players out there, but I was just kept thinking about Rust door codes. I if anyone has done any sort of serious Rust and raiding, anything like that, you want to make sure that you keep those codes secret. You give them to your friends, you put them on the papers, and then every time if someone finds out your door code, then it's just absolute panic. Everyone has to change their door codes before you get raided. And I sort of had that playing in the back of my head with these transponder tags
Mm.
where you want to make sure that your friends have them for when you're using them in those legitimate cases, even to make fleet formations and stuff like that. But you want to make sure that it absolutely doesn't fall into any sort of enemy hands, or you might be in trouble. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That actually brings, by the way, something that we will need to implement at some point, I think, is a sort of a central management of those. Because right now, with the implementation we will introduce, as a first step, if you want to change your tags because it has been compromised and there's a breach, you probably will have to go into every single ship, and edit the transponder and change the tags. So that could be fairly tedious. We're perfectly aware of that. So, well, at some point, we will introduce probably a sort of a management that allows you to remotely update those guys. But yeah, it's not necessary, for the feature to work. It's just a convenience. So definitely, we don't do it right now because we try to be very focused on what is absolutely necessary.
So you guys are asking some really great questions in the channel, and we're now going to get to those. And Big Edge, yes, we're live. So we'll start out with the Master Architect asks, can you put a search feature for constructs in the map menu?
Sure, we could do a lot of things. The map is, just to be clear, I mean, right now is a very limited implementation of what we have in mind for the map. But it requires a lot of development to go further from what we currently have, especially the map of the solar system, and in the future, when we have different solar systems, then you want to be able to show a galaxy map. This is a big development for us. So we decided not to do too much on the map side. It's in the revamp pipe, so it's going to be revamped so it looks better, and it's in line with the rest of the art direction that we've pushed in the last couple of months. But we don't want to invest too much into this. So unfortunately, I think the answer is going to be no. But keep in mind, I mean, this is something that needs a complete overhaul and needs to be designed properly. But it's too much of a work to be done in the short term.
I think there was a quality of life pass that was being done on the map, not the revamp that you're talking about, but I wonder if that was in or not. I'll have to double check with the UI guys and see what they say. But I wouldn't be too surprised if they actually added that in the quality of life pass that they were doing. So maybe.
Okay, perhaps.
I can't
Yes,
guarantee it,
yes.
but keep your hopes up.
A search option is something that is fairly easy to implement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. But I'm more thinking about the long-term obvious goal. That you want to be able to see a map of the whole system and see where you are in the system. These kind of things. That will require to move the map currently as it is to a full 3D render, which is not the case. In case you didn't notice, it's just a still image. So yes, so lots of work on that topic.
So continuing on the quality of life, we have another question regarding key mapping, and this is from, I might mispronounce this, but Krachnix. Will you allow us to remap all keys in the future? I really need to be able to assign the current modifiers like shift and control to other functions.
Well, definitely we wanna be able to remap everything. Now, shift and control, I wonder if they are not treated as a very special type of keys for on our
they are.
side. So I'm not sure this is gonna be. At least it's not gonna be easy. But if there is a strong need, then for sure we could consider that as well. Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna be happening anytime soon. But it's good to know that this is a concern for some people.
So we have another question with regards, we kind of touched on this, but this is from Drykey. Will we be able to hide our structures so they do not appear on radar? Right now, trying to hide your base underground or underwater is almost pointless. We kind of touched on it, but if you want to go into that.
Yes, of course. I mean, this is part of the extended, I would say, extended PvP features that we obviously have in mind. The fact that you could go on stealth and that would consume something, and there's some limits to that, and the whole gameplay around that, and you can unstealth things. And I mean, this is not implemented, uh, but that would be obviously something you need to have in the game. But it should come also with countermeasures. Otherwise, you basically disappear forever. So there should be a way, for someone to uncover something that is stealth, but it's not obvious. It's difficult, to do something like that. So it's in the, in the roadmap, in the long-term roadmap. We know we need that. Or other things we can mention, the fact that you can scramble some ships at a distance, so that certain of their, machinery will not work during PvP. This is very standard, electronic countermeasure type of gameplay that, of course, we want to implement, but they are not in the short-term roadmap for sure, and we will need to get all the rest of the PvP, polished and in good state before we move to that part of the gameplay. But short answer, yes, but not yet.
Funnily enough, just rapidly, this is something that came up when we were actually talking about transponders. The idea of like being able to go dark on a construct essentially, and that would come with its own set of restrictions and balancing. One thing that we had thought of is that you could essentially go invisible if you wanted a base in the middle of nowhere, and maybe that would have some restrictions, like you couldn't fire your own weapons, for example, right? So maybe your core unit wouldn't provide the power that you would need to activate those weapons or whatever. Then if you wanted to online that base, maybe it was an instant, and there would be like a little bit of a cooldown or a timer as a balancing measure. This is something that we've thought about. I think I want to say it wouldn't be like the most complex thing in the world to implement, having like a simple version of that. But it's just something that we need to plan for. And I think right now we're just very focused on stabilization and all that stuff. So I think eventually we will want something like that. And I would very much like to have that.
And just so you guys are aware, we did do the PvP trailer, as I'm sure you guys have seen. We are going to be talking a lot more about PvP going forward. So there's a lot of questions coming up regarding PvP we may not have answers for today, but we will get them to you. So we're going to move forward, though. We were talking about surrogates here. So this question is from Von Boy. Will surrogates be able to man guns? You talked last stream about being able to VR people over. We kind of touched that too, but did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, as you know, there are no guns yet in the game, so this is a question for relatively distant future in terms of roadmap. But following what we just said today, the answer would be no. That being coherent with what we just announced today, there's no reason why they would be able to man guns if they're just remote cameras, basically. So probably not, unless we have other reasons to to change our mind on that, and there's an overwhelming sort of pressure that this is the right thing to do. But well, I would say the first thing is that we should get the possibility to have avatar versus avatar, and this is a big thing, really big development for us. So yes.
One more surrogate question. We've got a bunch of them here. This is from Nothing But Fluff. Use of surrogates on a battleship. Again, we've kind of touched on this. Is there any penalty for dying as a surrogate on the ship?
Oh, good point. We need to consider that indeed it should come with a penalty if you die. That's absolutely clear, and perhaps something we forgot to mention. Indeed, yeah.
I think this is part of sort of it echoes very much what I said about warp drives, essentially, which is that surrogates are here, and now we need to figure out how they make sense. And I think having the right restrictions and figuring out exactly how they should work and what they can do and exactly where to place those barriers is what we're looking at from now on for both surrogates and warp drives, essentially. So if surrogates need to have some sort of cooldown when they die, where you can't use a station for whatever it happens to be, 10 minutes or whatever makes sense in the balancing, and that's something that we want to do so that we can do that.
And the logical thing to say is that a surrogate is a complex robot. That's the idea. And if you get destroyed, it costs to replace it. So you would have to sort of buy a new one, and you would have a capacity, which you already have. By the way, there's a limit on the number of people that can use a surrogate station at the same time. So I mean, this is clear. We're going to do something about that. But there's no emergency, to do this right now. So
We could imagine, for example, that if if we're in a situation where crewing a battleship is something that we want, it's a problem, it's too powerful, you could imagine that we could have dynamic only surrogate stations, right? So if you had a ship that was flying around in the middle of space and you were in the middle of a fight potentially, you could only spawn few people, maybe compared to a static one that could spawn many people in the case of
yeah.
tourism and that sort of things, right? So we're totally open to putting in whatever restrictions we need to put in to have those make sense. And we're exploring all options essentially.
So we'll move on a little bit from that topic. We're going to go to, I have no idea how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Leha Spurbank. Sorry, whatever. Do you have any plans on reducing distance between planets or made warp cells cheaper? Currently, you need 6 hours to get from Jago to Simeon, and if you want to use warp drives on a big ship, you need more than 100 cells, which is extremely expensive, no matter if you're going to buy them from bots or produce them yourself. So we know there's warp drives, but
Okay, so part of the things we need to do with the whole warp drives is to work on the recipes and make things well balanced. So I think this is ongoing work. So I will maybe let you comment on that, NQ Entropy. But definitely, the cheap travel with warp drives is meant to be with a small ship. You have a small personal ship, and that makes your travel easy. If you want to move, a giant space fortress, that makes sense. That this is kind of expensive in warp. So you would do that only if you have a good reason to be moving this massive thing quickly. Otherwise, you can always move it, with the standard method. That's the answer to the current situation. Now, that being said, as you know, there's a link, a proportional link between the cost in warp cells and the mass multiplied by the distance. We could very well, make that link non-linear. So instead of the mass, we take whatever the square root of the mass or whatever function we want to make it less aggressive. It sounded like the logical thing to do to make it linear, but we could tweak that as we want. Yeah, you want to say something about the recipes and the costs?
I mean, I think this sort of echoes what I said during the podcast. Warp drives are going to be an ongoing balance, and we are totally looking for feedback into what warp drives should be able to do and what they shouldn't be able to do, and we're very open to listening to those feedbacks. We just need to make sure that they're useful but that they're not overbearing, right? So maybe we need to look at exactly how long it takes for a warp drive to go from a planet to a planet. Okay, so how many tons can you actually move and how much time? Do we need to reduce the cost of warp cells? Does that mean that maybe we need to reduce the speed a little bit so that maybe you go a little bit slower, but it's still more cost efficient? So we have all these factors and we have all these variants that we can sort of like tweak up and down. And we have someone far smarter than I working on that and making sure that that makes sense. And I'll be sure to talk to him about it. But we are looking at it. We want warp drives to be used in their normal use case, which is transporting goods and sort of being able to move goods from one planet to the other. If that doesn't work, then we need to change it. We need to rebalance that. All of that, whether that's making just the recipe cheaper, which is sort of like a simple brute approach, or as JC said, changing the curve, making it less penalizing for more weight, and then maybe it only spikes to very expensive when you have like a huge massive battleship or some sort of a moving space station or something obscene. But yeah, it's something that we're looking at. We want it to make sense, and it shouldn't be totally absurd to move like medium-sized cargo ship from two medium-sized planets, right? That should be something that makes sense that you want to do, unless you want to be max cost efficient and because you have infinite time, which is the trade-off. If it's too expensive today, give us your feedbacks, give us specifics, because that's often what we lack. We look at it and we make a lot of calculations when we do a lot of testing, but sometimes we lack a little bit of that real gameplay experience that you guys all have. So if you guys have very specific situations, things that you're trying to do, you're trying to sell, titanium from this planet to this planet, but the cost of the warp drives make it totally prohibitive because the margins are wrong and nothing makes sense. those very specific numbers. Give us those use cases, and we can take a look at those and try to figure out, what we can do there.
One word I want to add about the prices. You mentioned the bots, and just to make it clear, I mean, currently the bots are buying and selling, so that there's a way for you to buy or sell anything. But the prices that have been set are extremely spread, and they're supposed to not make a lot of sense, to be honest. That is, they buy at an incredibly low price, and they sell at a super high price. So that the reason is that in a market, this is called a spread. The difference between the buy and sell order tops, and this is supposed to shrink as soon as you players are going to go into this market. And you're going to basically say, well, this body is selling at a ridiculous price. I can do better than that and still make a profit. It's cool. So you're going to be, undercutting the bet. And then somebody is going to be a little bit more aggressive than you and say, well, yeah, I can go and do better than that and still make a profit, and so on. So the thing is supposed to shrink very, very rapidly if there's a fluid market and activity, and come up to a price that represents the equilibrium of supply and demand. So, for example, if it's too expensive, people won't buy because they consider, just like you did, that it's way too expensive, so I don't use it. Well, then the price is going to drop because, the market is saying, I don't want to buy at that price. So this is a well-known, dynamics that occur on markets. And the current situation of the market is that the spread is still ridiculous. If you go on any live market, take whatever Bitcoin market you want to check, you go online and can see that the spread is super small. It's almost zero. And if at some point there is a moment where the spread grows because there's a massive buy or massive sell happening, whoop, it's going to be immediately closed almost into a new equilibrium that happens. That's the signature of fluid market. Of course, Bitcoin is extremely traded. We're far from that in Dual Universe on most items. But once we get more and more players, we hope that this is going to start to bootstrap, and that prices will get closer to something that makes sense. I would say by definition, that collectively the player agreed to say that makes sense. And the current values of the buy and sell by the bots are not supposed to make sense. They are just here so that there is a way that you can sell, and there's a way that you can buy. You don't have to wait for some player to actually put a buy order on a sell order. But it's not the end of the story. Far from it.
I saw someone. I think I saw someone say this in the chat, and I think that's a totally valid thing. And these are the sort of things. Sorry, that we're looking at. It's the idea of having maybe some variance between in your warp drive, right? So you can choose to go max speed and pay max price, or maybe you can choose to go half speed and pay half price, or maybe there's also some sort of linearity to how that works. So maybe you would never use max speed, and it's only there for like super emergencies. I absolutely need to get there, and I'm willing to pay it at any cost. And then maybe the normal mode is sort of half speed, so you still get there very rapidly, within 5 to 10 minutes rather than maybe 2 or 3. But it makes more sense on the cost price, and you're willing to trade that time for the gain in cost, essentially. So these are all options, and we're willing to make these changes if they make sense.
So we're going to move on a little bit here. This one's from Elias Vild, and this question is, when can we hope to have IP on Blueprints and Lua?
Okay, so this is something we are perfectly aware of. So on Blueprints, currently, I mean, if you sell a blueprint, if you sell a ship that has been made with a blueprint, unless there's a bug, the thing that should happen is that the person who buys that ship cannot actually, or the ship or building or whatever construct, can not actually make a new blueprint. The thing is basically, the construct remembers who was its creator. That is the person or the organization that basically deployed originally the core unit. Someone had at some point, deployed the core unit before this gets replicated through the blueprint machinery, and that's the creator. And if you're not the creator, you're not allowed to make a blueprint. It's as simple as that. That's the first layer. We are aware also that there are some copy paste issues, that you could actually copy paste the boxes. We're going to look into that, maybe to extend that, but it's a little bit tricky because Typically, you want to allow people to modify the construct. So some of the voxels are going to be copy pastable, some others will not. This is getting it complicated to implement and check. But anyway, we're going to look into that. But the core idea is already now, unless there's a bug, the way it is that you can design a ship, make copies of this ship through a blueprint, and sell those ships to other people without being worried that they will just remake a blueprint out of them. So that's one thing. Then there's the Lua thing. A lot of people would like to be able to hide basically the Lua. You can use it, but you don't know how it is working inside. For a long time, I said that trying to prevent that is pointless, because you can always, at some point the Lua code is going to be executed, so it's going to be unfolded even if you compress it, whatever you want. So someone to get access to the computer memory will be able to hack that. So we are developing we're implementing a technology with a partner to make that extremely difficult. In principle, impossible, but always be careful about that kind of claim. But anyway, it's going to be very difficult to do. So it starts to make sense to imagine that, even though I give you a Lua, you can execute it, but doesn't mean you have any ways to actually see what's going on inside it. So that opens the door for possibly also making Lua code not readable, so that you get a black box with a construct and some Lua mechanics. You can't actually access those Lua code. So this is something we're going to look into. I'm really not sure we can get that done for the beta, to be frank, but we're going to have a look at it. And so in any case, it's something that should not come too late. It's not so difficult to implement. And so it comes also with some modifications we have to do on the network, the way, you get the Lua only when you use it instead of getting it all the time, which is the case currently. And there's a lot of things we need to do. We know what to do, basically. We want to do it. And we understand, what is at stake, because what is super important in this game is that there is a flourishing, market of selling constructs. And to tell you the whole story, the end game of this is that we should have machinery in the game that allows you to create markets for constructs, so that based on a signature that corresponds to a given blueprint, that's the Falcon XR5 blueprint. Its name is well known. That's particular blueprint. It has a clear signature, and that would allow you to be able to resell your Falcon when you want to sell it after you fully repaired it and restored it into the original blueprint configuration. It's impossible to distinguish it from any other Falcon, so it becomes what is called fungible. It means that it can be traded. So it could actually appear on the market under the Falcon, item name, if you want. And then you could be able to sell and see buy orders, sell orders, and so on for that particular ship. That's the end game for us in terms of allowing trading of constructs to occur, so that the price of the Falcon would be the result of the market, as I said before, supply and demand and so on. That's a lot of work, that last part, and it's not going to come soon. Right now, if you want to become a construct seller, you have your blueprint. You can actually make copies of your construct and advertise that at a certain place in the game, people can show up and they can actually buy this construct from you using the barter interface. That's the way it works. So you could design a website, advertising your constructs, giving the coordinates, people can show up and do the trade with you. It's still a little bit artisanal and not very, it doesn't allow to have a massive industry and so on, but it still works, to motivate people to design constructs and to sell them to other players, which is a crucial thing, because we don't expect every player to be willing or able to design very functional ships from the ground up. We expect rather that people would buy a ship that is cool and then customize it to their liking. That's the use case, the predominant use case we want to favor.
Just to touch very rapidly on the copy paste issue, just to go back to that for a second. One of the major problems with this issue is that you're never going to be able to completely cancel out the Chinese copy syndrome, right? So if I have a ship that I bought from somebody and it's just there and it's sitting there, if I get the elements in the right spots and if I'm a decent builder and I get most of the things where they need to go, and even if I don't have like the very specific voxelmency and it's not 100% there, if I get 80 to 90% of the way there and it's functionally just as good, that we have no way really of being able to combat that. So
Yes, just to contradict that a little bit, the key is that in your universe, it's actually quite difficult to make a ship that really works. And if you had all the goodies that you could add through Lua and whatever, display on the screen, it can get really difficult. I mean, just like, this comparison is kind of interesting. I mean, for a long time, it's not the case, of course, now, but for a long time, Chinese products were like looking like the thing, but not really as good, really, because all the details were not
but over time
understood,
they've gotten a
basically.
lot better.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the point is that what you say is possible for a trivial construct, for something that will get a lot of craftsmanship and a lot of know-how. There will always be at least, let's say, an incentive to go and buy the real thing rather than the copy.
Sure. I just
But
think
anyway,
that
you're right. There's no way to prevent smart people to copy what other smart people have done. That's for sure.
that's what I'm
That's for sure. But you can always start a war against him and try to nuke him out. That's that's the possibility. I hope it's not going to happen with China, by the way.
So I'm going to let these guys get back to work soon, but we're going to take just a couple more questions. And the first one is from Bot1974. Can you please talk about the performance for a moment, both in terms of mining response and CPU, GPU loads?
Okay, so you might actually be talking about the current situation that is on the server. So there is a problem. A recent change on the voxels apparently didn't work. So we're going to fixing that. Currently, there are some instabilities, so we are aware of that. It's not a major issue. It's going to be fixed. On the CPU, I'm not sure this is the problem you're referring to, but there's the concern that the game is using 100% of all the cores. And I'm going to say it again, this is not a bug. This is a feature. This is your cores are designed, your computer is designed to be able to run at 100%, 24 hours, non-stop. That's the spec of Intel or AMD processors. Unless you overclock them and you don't cool them enough or things like that. And yeah, you're out of the spec basically, but it's perfectly fine. And there are tons of computers all around the world, inside data centers and whatnot that are just running 100% all the time, and it's fine. It's just nominal. So it happens that not a lot of games are using the full capacity of multi-threading that gets you to use all your cores. It's also relatively recent, that you have so many cores at your disposal. So I would say, sort of the industry has to sort of catch up. I mean, the whole industry, the software industry, has to catch up to the fact that it's probably necessary now to use all the cores of your machines. You probably know of recent CPUs by AMD that have like 128 cores. I don't remember, but I mean, a ridiculous number of cores. That makes sense only if your applications is going to tap into this power. And if you're at some point, you will find out that if a game is using only one core, that's a bug. That's a problem for you because you don't get all the power you paid for, basically. So it's all right that Joule is putting all the CPUs at 100%. It's because the voxels are computing. Some changes that we're going to make, with the mesh service is going to probably lower that. But again, it's not something we try to optimize because it's okay. You have a multi-core machine. It's cool. We're going to use all your CPU power. There's no problem with that. And if it's heating too much and the computer even crashes or something, there's a problem with your cooling system, or maybe you're overclocking a little bit too much. But that's what's going on, right? And in very, very rare cases, you might actually have a hardware issue. But I expect that to be extremely rare because Intel and AMD, the job is to provide CPUs that do not fail in these situations. So
I think just the backup answer to that is that we're always going to try to optimize so that it's doing the best that it can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stop using 100% of your CPU. We'll keep using 100% of your CPU. It's just going to load everything a lot faster, hopefully. So
we could decide also to use all this idle CPU to compute things that are far away that you don't necessarily need now, but we sort of have a prediction algorithm that will tell us that maybe you're going to go there. So why not actually render it already and things like that. So I would say, a happy CPU is a CPU that is always at 100. It's busy.
So stepping away from performance, I'm going to go back for one more question about gameplay. This is from Sledgehammer. For those who are new players and have never played games like Eve or, where progression is real time and crafting is real time, meaning I log in and have accrued points to spend, have you considered other progression models, or what led to this method for Dio?
Sorry, for what method too?
Progression, yes, sorry.
Oh, for progression, yes. One thing is clear, is that there are not enough ways for, first of all, for people to make money in the game to start with. So we know that it's not a discovery. Currently, we have implemented the surface gathering that allows you to get very simple form of mining that you can convert into money and start to progress with this money to buy stuff you want and so on. We also would like to implement, as you know, but it has been postponed for now, a sort of a mission system that will allow people to create missions that is basically quests, in the name of an organization and make them public so that as a new player you can get into the game and see basically things you could do if you're not self-motivated by default, then you can actually have a look at that and get some simple missions. But they will come from players. That's a very important thing. They're not going to be like fake quests. Or if we do, it's going to be very, very entry level type of pick that here and bring it over there kind of quest. Just basically more like a tutorial than anything else. And so the progression from there is going to be on doing those kind of missions, doing those different ways to accumulate a bit of wealth so that you can afford the kind of ships, the kind of things you want to have. And then there's the progression of the talents that will unlock some specialty for your character. That is going to be an important form of progression. And we also want to make it possible for players who will be more like, let's say the Minecraft crowd, so that they're more oriented towards building, so that they can go, on the sanctuary moons where you can deploy only one special territory unit that is dedicated to sanctuary moons. And on this territory unit, you can build. And we make sure that there are some markets around. At some point, the surface gathering will renew so that you can harvest things and come back later so that you get more, so that you can make a bit of money, so that you can finance, buying raw materials to build whatever you want to build. So this is a very particular type of, player experience. So people really are builders. They want to build. They don't want to go into wars. They want to go into anything complicated. They just want to build stuff. They enjoy that. So we perfectly understand that, and I think it's a huge, perfectly valid use case for Dual Universe. So we're going to actually address that. And then your progression is going to be as you build more and more spectacular things. Maybe at some point you put a surrogate pod there so you get visitors, you're happy. It's also entirely possible that, the current implementation of the right system is called the RDMS. It's the Right and Duty Management System. As I said in previous podcasts, we only have the RMS. The D is completely missing right now from the game. And the D part is about the fact that when I give you a right, I can also attach sort of a duty to it, which could be monetary. So like, you can use this, I give you that right, but when you use it, you have to pay something. Or you have to pay for 1 month. During that month, you'll be able to use it as much as you want. There are different ways, to monetize that will be available. Once you have that, you can actually get people to pay to use your surrogates. Why not? It's just like, visiting a museum or something. And countless of other uses that will appear from that fact that you can actually monetize the fact that you give the right for other people to use your stuff. could be a powerful factory, could be anything. I mean, this is another layer that's going to add. It's going to be added at some point in the game.
Just to touch quickly on player progression here, one of the things that we always have kicking around in the background, but it just never quite priority enough to make it there, is gear. We know that we eventually
Oh
want
yeah,
some sort of gear on characters, on actual avatars, and you can run around with your, +3 mining gloves and whatever the hell you want. And that's something that we want. We have nothing against it. It's just a question of when we can do it, and it not being a core issue right now, it'll probably have to wait. But that's something that we would like for player progression. And the second thing that we have started exploring recently and that we want to do more is element variations. So that's a different type of progressions. It's not character based,
yeah.
it's more construct based. But we recently released the engine variations for atmospheric and space, I believe. Um, so now you can start off and have your basic T1 Atmo engine, and then when you've sort of progressed a little bit and you start getting those extra resources, whether you're buying it off the market or you're making it yourself, you can upgrade your engine from a normal one to a specialized hauling one or a specialized fighter one or whatever we have. And that's a different type of progression that we can have in the game. And the element variations is something that we want to keep expanding upon at infinity, right? So eventually we might have tier 5 atmospheric engines that are like super powerful and can do very special things or whatever and stuff like that.
We have a lot of leftover questions, and I know you guys want answers. I do want to get these guys back to work, but we're going to take 2 more. These are just kind of some follow-up questions that you've posted, and they're quick ones. So are you planning to add more languages? That's from Sexy Zine.
Yes.
Those are quick ones. See?
Yeah. And to be more precise, we're going to support French, German, and I think quickly after there will be Russian support. And then once we have this machinery on track, we can add more languages fairly easily because we have, of course, a generic system to allow to do this, and so we will be able to support more languages. But we try to cover the most used languages first.
Going back to the markets, Nerd Guy 40 had a really good question, and he says, "What about reputation markets from trading, such as, for example, verified sellers or ratings, depending on the trade that went through? It could become a spam thing, however, per account. But is this something that we would ever consider?"
No, totally. I mean, the reputation system is a core thing you need into when you have an emergent community like that. So not only for trading, for whatever. In fact, for missions, for example, I mentioned the missions. How do you know the mission is a real one and it's not just a trap? Somebody is paying you to bring something from point A to point B, and in point B there is a trap. So this is going to be a more general concern of being able to attach a reputation to players. And of course, as usual with these kind of things, the problem is to make it resilient to abuses, so that you cannot increase your rating by cheating somehow. This is not a problem that is particularly new. I mean, all the platforms that are online today for food, for whatever, when you buy from a seller on Amazon or anything, it's always the same issue: is to try to be able to give you a fair account of the trustability of your partner, and without having a system that can be manipulated too easily. So definitely, yes, we are going to implement that. It's necessary, and it's just that we considered it was not absolutely necessary, so it's not done right now, and not for beta, but it's going to come.
There you guys have it. So we know you still have a lot of unanswered questions. We will try to answer some more of them on Discord and the community as we go. As you guys know, there is an active test. Please send us your feedback. It's very important, especially with regards to the tutorials. There's some new ones in there. Did you guys have anything else you'd like to add today?
No, not yet. The tutorials are completely new, and they are it's the first iteration. So we'd like to have feedback. We added voice, as you probably noticed, so that you can be driven through the tutorial. There's a fair amount of new tech behind all this, so that it works. What we call sandbox planets. So they are instantiated for you to leave your tutorial, and then they are garbage collected away. So this is a new thing, and I think it's very important that we get it right. So we're going to work. It's easy to iterate now. It's like everything is scripted in Lua, so we can do a lot of things. So this is something we would like to hear you, giving the feedback. The thing is, if you're already in game, you might not even be exposed to those tutorials, because that's something that really spawns when you get in the game for the first time. Still, you can start tutorials by getting back to one of the districts and going into one of the institutes that are open. Not all of them are open yet, and you should find teleporters to start the different tutorials. Right now, there's 2 tutorials that are available. There is the 2 tutorials about flying, so flying a hovercraft and flying a ship, atmospheric ship, so a plane basically. And there's also the core tutorial, which is the thing that triggers the first time you get into the game. So probably not accessible to you unless you just join. But we're gonna add, a way for you to trigger it anytime you want later if you want to test it. So this is coming. Yes, and otherwise, we're going to do that more often, so there will be other occasions to discuss questions like we do now. We want to be open, we want to be live, we want to be able to respond to your concerns. We know, we read everything you write, so we know about the concerns. You have to keep in mind that this project is really big, because it's not just developing a game. You might, compare to other games and say, why is it taking so much time to do all those things that I see in other games? The answer is that we don't just develop a game. We also develop a full technology stack. From a lot of the things in the engines are customized for our needs, so we do it ourselves. It's not off the shelf, from the engine that we use. Of course, there's all the server technology. It's an MMO, so everything gets more complicated. I mean, we have a lot of tech, the new textures, the new management of. I mean, I could speak for hours. It's a big tech company, in fact. And a large part of the developers and engineers are working not necessarily directly on the game, but on the tech that is supporting the game. So keep that in mind. We try to advance on both fronts, and we try to go as fast as possible. But this is it's a big ambitious thing that will take its time, right? So stay tuned.
There you guys have it. Stay tuned. I'm going to let these guys get back to work. Thank you very much for tuning in. We are going to do this more often, and we'll see you guys in the community.
See you
Have a
guys
good
See
later.
you. Bye bye.